The Invasion of Broadway.
So this notion that the Beatles brought Britain to America, bollocks. Lionel did it. Lionel and Tony Newley and Joe Meek and the Tornadoes. They made that British Revolution happen. And so Oliver's Britishness was what the Americans loved.
If I ruled the world,
musicals were no longer seen as dreary and old-fashioned. They were suddenly the bright new thing, and everybody wanted to be part of it, including Lionel Bart's former bandmate and Britain's most famous pop star, Tommy Steele.
I was an English Elvis Presley. But the problem with me was, and it's not a problem, is that I wanted to be in musicals.
When I first met him, I was like, blah, 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 blah. And of course, I'm only a teenager, you've got to remember. So for me, he was like a huge star.
By 1963, the British musical was on such a wave of popularity that a show was written as a star vehicle for Steele. But even for such a seasoned performer, the transition from pop performer to stage performer was a daunting experience.
I do remember the first night when I walked on stage, because I had to walk on stage facing Tommy, and I sort of saw out the corner of my eye, all these heads go vroom, like this, all of them turned towards me, and I thought, oh my God.
You're in the dark and the show's going on and your cue's coming up and the music is just coming into the last 24 bars, and you know in 23, 22, 21 that bloody light's going to hit the corner and I'm going to have to walk into it.
And I was so scared, and I looked at Tommy and he was shaking. I thought, oh thank God he's scared like me.
Oh, here it comes, but I'm all right now.
And though that half a sixpence can only mean half a romance, remember that half a romance is better than none.
Half a Sixpence told the story of an orphan who unexpectedly inherits a fortune. But if this was to be the musical to launch a pop star's switch to the stage, it would need a standout number. Just 2 days before opening, the producers realised that was exactly what was missing.
Unless you've got an 11 o'clock number that sends the folks out to their buses and their trains whistling it, you're in trouble. You have not got a hit.
Composer David Henniker had just 1 day to come up with a solution.
And on the Sunday we met and they played Flashbang Wallop.
Who did Flashbang Wallop? What a picture, what a picture, what a photograph.
And because we didn't have time to work out what I would be doing in the number, they decided that we'd bring all the company on, and every time I said hold it, they froze. So we made it in the photographer's studio.
Stick it in your family album.
It became the biggest hit of the season.
one more picture, hold it.
The same thing.
With a big closing number and the star power of Steele, Half a Sixpence became a huge success in the West End and on Broadway. But the British musical's revival was to be short-lived. Half a Sixpence would be the last British musical export to America for 15 years.
Stick it in your family, stick it in your family, in your family album.
A world away from the glamour of Broadway, in mid-60s Britain, an alternative movement was growing. Tens of thousands marched against nuclear weapons, and over in London's East End, Joan Littlewood reflected these anti-establishment views with a scathing attack on the military incompetence of World War I.
Oh, What a Lovely War was inspirational. To have a musical about a subject like that, you know, I mean, it was quite controversial because it wasn't patriotic by any manner of means, it was telling the truth.
With its soundtrack of World War I songs, Oh What a Lovely War not only attacked the generals, but also outraged many in the audience by depicting soldiers as Pierrot clowns.
People would scrunch their programs up and throw it at us in disgust. How dare you? and or my family were killed in that war, and you're dancing on the graves, where people accuse us of dancing on the graves of the soldiers. As Joan said, no, we're dancing with them.
Pack up your troubles in your own kit bag and smile, smile, smile.
I mean, it was an extraordinary approach to a subject that gutted you, and it was deeply moving, deeply moving. And she managed to get that combination of comedy, song, dance, everything, and hit you with it.
While Littlewood went on to win awards for Oh What a Lovely War, Lionel Bart had found more success with the musicals Blitz and Maggie May. So when the two joined up in 1965 for a musical based on the legend of Robin Hood, it looked destined to become Britain's biggest hit musical yet, particularly when backed by a record-breaking budget of £130,000.
There he goes again on his merry way.
But problems plagued the production from day one.
Backstage, it's been toil and trouble almost right from the start. And the cast of Twang have had the longest run ever before actually getting in front of a London audience.
Joan had a sort of free and easy style, out of which she hoped to draw spontaneity and fresh ideas, and, but it wasn't quite buttoned down enough for me.
How much rewriting has been done at it?
Absolutely everything. I don't do anything the same.
Things ran out of control, really. I mean, people, making up all sorts of rubbishy little scenes.
One day, one particular scene is in one spot, and then the next day it's in another spot. Do you see what I mean? And then one day, 4 scenes are cut out.
If you had a good little part and a good little moment, you were advised not to go to the lavatory, otherwise when you came back, somebody had either taken it over or it had gone entirely, been erased.
Whole scenes were dumped. Some parts were cut down to a fragment, other parts expanded.
Barbara Windsor, among others, suggests that a lot of dope was being smoked at the time, that Lionel, a year ahead of the Beatles, might have done acid by then. So there was, a drug put into the cocktail.
The creative chemistry that was set up for the original production did not mix, it exploded.
Twang was due to open in Manchester before transferring to the West End, but just one day before press night, Littlewood finally had enough and left the production.
She was seen walking out with a beige folder on her arm, and written in big pencil on the outside was Lionel's final fuck-up. And so that must have been what she thought at the time.
She said I had to leave because Lionel became impossible. Every day there was some other new thing he wanted to do. By that time, ego, bigger than his hat.
There were 2 different methods of approach. Joan Littlewood was doing a commedia dell'arte, grow while you work thing on the scenes, and I was doing songs elsewhere, and her scenes changed every day, and I just had to keep up with her. Consequently, when we opened in Manchester, the audience and I saw a number of the scenes for the first time.
What makes a star into a star? Nobody knows. They simply are.
Even with more extensive rewrites, on its West End opening in December 1965, Twang was universally panned. After playing to mostly empty houses, it closed 1 month later after just 43 performances.
I wonder if it was the saddest time in Lionel's life. I think I'm right in saying he pumped a lot of his personal money into it to try and keep it, keep it going.
Remember Oliver, Maggie May, and Things Ain't What They Used to Be? Well, for Lionel Bart today, things definitely ain't. For the man who once earned a fortune from his songwriting is in debt to the tune of £160,000 and is in the process of being declared bankrupt.
Against all advice, he had invested his own personal fortune into twang and lost it all. He never wrote another successful musical. By the late 60s, Bart's style of pop-influenced Cockney musical appeared hopelessly out of date.
This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, the age of Aquarius.
Yet another American blockbuster had landed in the West End, which not only challenged the conventions of musical theatre, but the power of the British establishment. And its inspiration came from Bart's one-time collaborator.
One influence that I've never really mentioned to anybody before was a British musical that came to New York. It was a woman director, Joan Littlewood, and it was a show called Oh, What a Lovely War. And I remember sitting there in the audience and seeing this musical. It's a wonderful show, wonderfully the way it was staged and the fact that it was singing, and it was all about war. I think that was a strong influence on us because this whole thing was about the movement that was going on in the streets.
We had the Vietnam War on our screens every night. You know, we were very aware of what was going on. And the other thing about Hair was, of course, it celebrated that whole hippie movement, which, of course, had affected this country as well.
I got my hair, I got my head, I got my brains, I got my ears, I got my eyes, I got my nose, I got my mouth, I got my teeth.
Hair told the story of a group of young hippies protesting against the Vietnam War and wrestling with the sexual revolution. The creators' backgrounds were in experimental theatre. Much like Joan Littlewood, the emphasis was on spontaneity and improvisation.
I think Hair, which I was part of as being the runner on the original production, you know, I noticed that even though the entire thing, from the audience perspective, almost seemed improvised, it was improvised to a very, very careful point, and the numbers evolved through workshops and things like that, but they were very, very cleverly staged.
To add to the credibility of the show, the producers cast unknown actors, and in doing so, introduced a new generation of talent to the West End.
I'm just a hairy guy. They were looking for kids off the street rather than trained actors per se. They were looking for actors who could be moulded into what they called the tribe.
The audience, at the beginning, when they came to see Hair, I feel they felt that they were actually seeing real hippies on stage.
I never bought into the tribe thing, to be honest with you. I mean, Gary Hamilton playing Burger used to go on stage in all his outfit, you know, his hippie outfit and all that, and peace, love, and then he used to walk out the stage door and climb into a Bentley. And I couldn't quite work that one out. It always made me laugh, that. You know, I didn't live that life. You know, I didn't go home to a squat with 12 other people. I mean, some of them did.
I lived in a commune with several other members of the company, a rather posh commune, I have to say, in Hampstead, in a penthouse, actually.
Oh, black boys are nutritious, black boys fill me up, black boys are so damn yummy, they satisfy my tummy, I am such a treat when it comes to love.
But at the beginning of 1968, the Lord Chamberlain still had right of censorship over all new theatre productions. With overt references to sex and drugs, Hair was one show he wouldn't let go on.
I had a visit from the special branch, and they warned me what risk I was taking by opening it. Probably to intimidate me. I don't think they would have come to my office otherwise.
The pressure on the government to reform the powers of the censor became overwhelming. On September the 24th, after 220 years, the Lord Chamberlain's powers were finally withdrawn.
Hair really contributed to the change of the law. It would be on the news day in, day out what was happening.
3 days after the censor was abolished, Hair opened, and the British public had never seen anything like it before.
Are you all in the nude scene?
It was just an expression of people just taking their clothes off and saying, this is who we are. And you can read into that what you like. Some people probably found it moving, other people probably found, you know, they got turned on by it. But ultimately it was very innocent.
There was much to do about nothing, except for selling tickets.
For the first time in a musical, frequent references were made to recreational drug use. The experimentation with illegal substances continued off-stage.
We all dabbled a bit in marijuana, obviously, and some of the cast smoked a little bit more than others.
I mean, you know, I was a nice suburban girl, me, from Barnet, and I never thought that I would ever, I'm really giving it away now, aren't I, ever, you know, try a spliff.
I'm sure that the odd person went on the stage stoned, but it wasn't a good idea because you found yourself just standing there looking at people. You know, and they're going, well, okay, you've got something to say now, and you're going, yeah. What?
People would pop up on the interval onto the roof of the Shaftesbury Theatre for a quick, you know, tote. In fact, I'm ashamed to admit, I think I got fired, and that was from Hair eventually, not for smoking dope, but they used the excuse that we'd been caught smoking on the roof.
When the moon is in the seventh house and Jupiter aligns with Mars.
With its subversive stance and contemporary music, Hair reached out and spoke to a generation uninterested in the past conventions of musical theatre.
I think Hair brought a new audience that wouldn't be seen dead on Shaftesbury Avenue. Young people who would never think of the theatre being anything more than a treat for their elderly relatives suddenly wanted to see this show because it actually represented them.
We kind of felt that we were changing the world. The world was changing, and we were reflecting it from the point of view of this very wonderful love and peace movement.
I never thought we were going to change the world. What I thought we were changing was theatre. It was the first time that music of the time, that is to say rock music, was being used within the context of a musical. So from that point of view, it was groundbreaking, I thought.
By the late 60s, British bands like Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple and The Who were getting more ambitious with rock music, experimenting with extended tracks and concept albums. In 1970, in what would prove to be the most radical evolution of the British musical yet, two aspiring young songwriters released a record that fused rock with opera.
Jesus Christ Superstar is the first truly great, truly British rock opera, because it's structured like an opera. Suddenly there was no speaking. This thing is sung all the way through. But it's sung to the rhythms and to the beats of the 60s generation.
David Land is an agent who looks after the Dagenham Girl Pipers and the Harlem Globetrotters. He feels the next big trend could be Jesus Christ Superstar.
Don't know how to love him.
Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber would each bring very different qualities to the British musical. While both fans of rock music, lyricist Rice knew next to nothing about musical theatre. Lloyd Webber lived and breathed it.
When we came to work together, I was probably less conventional than he was. He was very much in the Broadway West End tradition. I had ideas that weren't perhaps traditional. So the combination of my being slightly uneducated about musicals and Andrew being very educated about musicals worked.
I don't see why he moves me.
Released in 1970, if the album was a hit, Rice and Lloyd Webber could attract interest from theatre producers and turn Superstar into a fully blown stage musical.
We only released the album because nobody wanted to do the show, and it was not a hit in Britain. And as it had been a #1 album in America, hugely successful, it was logical to do it on Broadway first.
Jesus, you started to believe the things they say of you. You really do believe this talk of God is true.
Hair had previously introduced sex, nudity and drugs to the theatre, but it seemed setting the final days of Jesus Christ to rock music was a step too far. Superstar opened on Broadway in October 1971 to the outrage of Christian groups and a lukewarm reception from the press.
It didn't work largely because the young kids who'd originally bought the album wouldn't have been seen dead on Broadway in those days. So we were slightly ahead of our time. All right, there'd been Hair before, but Hair probably got people in because everybody got their kit off.
They found the new Messiah.
Even with the shaky start on Broadway, producer Robert Stigwood had plans for an opening in the West End. But Rice and Lloyd Webber saw their careers faltering before they even got started.
Tim and Andrew were terrified. They fought me tooth and nail not to open it. Descended on me at 2 o'clock in the morning. You'll ruin our reputation. You'll ruin us, you'll ruin us.
Everything's all right, yes, everything's fine, and we want you to sleep well tonight.
With producer Robert Stigwood holding the rights, the West End's latest protégés had to put their nerves to one side as press attention in Superstar started to grow.
They did a thing with the newspapers. The search for Jesus is on, a bit like the X Factor, you know, we're looking for Jesus. And finally, after extensive auditions, going back and back and back, I finally got the part. And I was surrounded by press, and I made my very first mistake. Some guy shoved a pint of beer in my hand, right, and said, cheers, right? And the shot in the paper was, Jesus is having a pint. And I thought, oh, never again.
We had nuns protesting with placards outside the theatre, and everybody would say to me, Anthony, that's brilliant, you know, well done for doing all that. They did it off their own back. I wasn't telling them to do it.
The title was so radical, calling Jesus Christ a superstar. I mean, we had people out front protesting just on the basis of the title.
It seemed to me that it was perfectly possible to take Bible stories and tell them in a new way through contemporary music. And that's really all we were trying to do.
Superstar opened in August 1972 to universally good reviews. The radical interpretation of the Gospels moving audience, critics, and even the cast.
It was very overwhelming because I remember the first time I went up on this cross. And now, I'm not a religious guy at all. And I was sort of sitting on a bicycle seat, but you couldn't see it, and I was holding onto a frame that you also couldn't see. So I looked like I was hanging in midair. And for me, you know, when they started playing that John 49, that Gethsemane music that he'd written, I mean, just tears were streaming down me. And it really was a very, very moving moment. And I guess for a lot of the audience, seeing that and hearing that music for the first time, they would have felt the same way.
With the West End audience seemingly more spiritually relaxed than on Broadway, Superstar appealed to believer and non-believer alike.